live?
Okay, you're live.
Not yet. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, mic hold off.
I Okay, you're live.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ken Ray. I'm the mayor of the Village of Sleepy Hollow. This is a meeting of the 2021 Board of Assessment Review. We are meeting via teleconference as allowed by the governor's emergency order in early spring last year, which allows all municipalities to meet via video conferencing as we are this evening. I'm going to begin with a roll call, and I'll begin with Trustee Gebler.
Here.
Trustee Spiro.
Here.
Trustee Scaglione.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Rosenblum.
I'm here, just having some technical difficulties. The video should be on shortly.
You're on.
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay.
And
you guys.
You're so lucky. And Trustee Gonzalez.
Here.
Okay, and we have a quorum. The meeting tonight of the Board of Assessment Review is to consider the master list of grievances that's been earlier submitted to the board for its review. I know that we have some questions on that that are going to take some time and some detail to follow up with our assessor, Ms. McCarthy. So what I would like to do is entertain a motion to adjourn the board until further notice while we have an opportunity to consider those questions, and so that we can then come back and adopt the assessment. What is important for us to note is that we will, of course, need to get that out so it can be mailed to everyone by April 1st, which is our deadline there, and also so that we can get it to our treasurer so she can begin to prepare our budget for the next year. Can I get a motion to, unless there are any other questions or comments on the grievances at this time?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye or indicate aye.
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 Aye. Sam?
Aye.
Great, thank you. And we are adjourned. The next meeting of the Board of Assessment Review will be posted on the village website, on the village bulletin board, and the other places that we post. Ms. McCarthy, thank you and good night. Be well.
Thank you, Edie. Thank you, Edie.
Thank you.
And we will continue our work this evening with our regularly scheduled work session. And first up is a presentation on our progress on downtown zoning. And we welcome back Simon Cates to begin and lead us through that discussion and give us an update. Mr. Cates.
All right, thank you all. I think I'm going to be able to share my screen here. So let me pull this up. Okay. Can you all see my screen here?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great. So as you all know, we from BFJ Planning worked on the comprehensive plan for the Village of Sleepy Hollow, adopted, I believe, in November of 2019. And one of the first items that we recommended for implementation was updating the zoning code. And that's what you all have kicked off here, and that's what we at BFJ have been working on, myself and my colleague Susan Favate. And we're just getting into it. We've met with our technical committee once so far, and I'll talk about them in our overall timeline in just a moment. But one other thing I wanted to say by means of introduction is that what we've done is taken the recommendations in the comprehensive plan and are starting to dig into what the details are. How do we take these recommendations from concepts that are in the plan to remove barriers, to promote economic development, to promote more contextual development in different areas, take those recommendations and move them along toward something that you all are satisfied with and can vote on to revise your zoning code. So that's what we're working toward. And I'll talk a little bit about our timeline and how we plan on working with all of you on that in a moment. The other thing I wanted to do tonight is give you all a bit of a summary of our first meeting with the committee in terms of developing those details, and we'll talk about our next steps. I'll try to be brief. I'm not going to go into every individual detail that's on the slide in some cases, but please feel free to stop me if you want to talk about something in more detail. And I also am happy to stay as long as you all would like me to, if you have other questions or want to discuss once I wrap up the presentation here. Okay, so this is our committee who we've met with once so far. It's a great group. A lot of these are folks that Susan and I know from the comprehensive plan process. There's a couple who were new to us, who we met for the first time a couple of weeks ago. But it's a really good cross section of knowledgeable people in the village. So we feel like we're going to get some good guidance here and knowledge about what some of the key issues are. And it's great to have here tonight both Anthony and Sandra, who we've been meeting with, to provide some continuity between the committee and also our meetings here tonight. In terms of the timeline, this is just slightly different from what was in our proposal, just because we started a little bit later than we had anticipated, but we think we'll still finish around the same time in June. We've made our way through this first phase here, which is essentially reviewing what was in the plan and starting to turn that into more specific zoning language. We've met with our committee once, as I mentioned, on February 17th. Following that meeting, we got some guidance from that committee, and we're working on this item up here that I'm circling with my laser pointer here, which is developing those zoning options, taking them to a little bit more detail. However, while the committee is very helpful to us, we also want to bounce ideas off of you and make sure that we're not going off in a direction that you all are not going to support, right? Of course, we need you to you to be on board with anything that we're proposing. The trustees are the only body that can adopt the zoning, so that's why we're here tonight to check in with you. We're going to go back to the steering committee on March 24th. Following that, we'll start putting some of these ideas into actual zoning text in a draft form, and then we'll come back to you at one of your meetings in April. I've got this sort of penciled in early April, but we'll work with Anthony to figure out which work session works best to see you all in April, to make sure that we're, as I said, that we're on the right track here. This is just an outline of the different types of zoning recommendations that are in the comprehensive plan. First, there were a set of proposed map changes. Second, some updates to permitted uses in certain districts, updates to your parking regulations, looking at potential development incentives to encourage infill development and adaptive reuse, and some ideas to streamline the approvals process to remove barriers to development that you already that the code already allows and that you may want to see more of in the downtown. So I'm going to just at a high level go through sort of where we are, what these different recommendations were in the comprehensive plan, and some notes on our first meeting with the technical committee, just to give you an update on how we're starting to develop these ideas into a little bit more detail. The first one here might be one of the more straightforward ideas. What the plan recommended was, and here we're on Hudson Street, right off of Beekman, right bottom of Beekman Avenue down there. And Hudson Street, that stretch is currently zoned R4A. My understanding is that this was a zoning district that was created while GM was still operating. It allows retail and restaurants along Hudson Street here, which is not what exists on Hudson Street. It's predominantly or really entirely residential once you get off of Beekman, and one parcel down close to the village border down by Division Street down here. But the rest of it is all residential. And so the recommendation is in the plan, which you see over here on the right, is to take that mid-block stretch, rezone it as R5 to acknowledge what the land use that has persisted there over the years, which is solidly residential, and take those ends of the block. There's an automotive use down here to the south, and then of course the restaurants and other retail uses up on Beekman, and allow those to be the commercial uses that they that they are and we think are appropriate there. So that's the first map change here on Hudson Street. The second one, which was proposed in the plan, was on Clinton Street. The idea here was to change the zoning on Clinton Street between Beekman and Cortlandt, you see here on the map, from C2 to R5. And what we said in the plan was, there are some industrial or maybe other commercial uses on Clinton Street that maybe aren't appropriate there, and Clinton should be more solidly residential. Now, when we talked about this with the technical committee on the zoning that we met with just a couple of weeks ago, there was some pushback on that, and I think Susan and I are certainly open to that, and maybe leaning in the direction that the committee is, which is that the commercial uses that exist on Clinton are okay, right? There's corner stores and a couple of restaurants and some shops and things like that maybe are appropriate on Clinton Street. And the more industrial uses that you see toward the southeast, closer to Cortlandt, they're already not allowed in the C2. So the issue here might not be the zoning that's allowed. It might be figuring out ways to encourage investment or incentivize development here, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So this is where we're leaning right now, which is actually not making this change that's in the plan from C2 to R5 on Clinton Street. And the other map change is looking at Lower Beekman west of Kendall. It's a stretch of Beekman that in character is like you can see on in the photos here on the right side of the screen. It's different from Upper Beekman. It doesn't feel as commercial, but it is zoned the same. It's C2 zoning, which of course allows offices and restaurants and so on. But the building type here, it feels more residential. It's a lower scale. And what we recommended in the plan is to keep the sort of flexibility of use in this area, continue to allow commercial uses, but to create an overlay for this part of Beekman that would place additional sort of design or form regulations on the scale and massing of the building, so that you may continue to have this type of building type that we see on the right here, even if you continue to allow, for example, a professional office or maybe a small restaurant or a retail shop, a boutique shop that could be appropriate in one of these one of these residential buildings. It's a way to allow that stretch of Beekman, Lower Beekman, to maintain the character that it has now. It's a nice sort of change from the two sort of commercial poles that are on Upper Beekman that exists, and then at the bottom end of Beekman with Edge that's sort of in evolution and coming into being. So that was the thought there on Lower Beekman.
So Simon,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
So in this section of Beekman, right now it's zoned as C2.
That's right.
Yes.
And so what are we changing it to?
So it would stay as C2, but there would be an overlay that only applies to this section of the C2. That would say
allowing the commercial also.
Keep all of the uses that are allowed in the C2, but it has to be within this other building form, this other sort of building massing, so that you could still do a professional office. It would just have to be in this other, building type that is more consistent with the form of the surrounding context down there.
Okay, great. Thank you. That answers that question. Great.
And the only thing I was going to bring up, and Anthony, if you can refresh my memory, didn't something just develop in this area where somebody's either renovating one of the houses or using it as a different use?
Someone had approached the building department with a large project, I think something like 15 units as of right on one of the properties. It's a very large property. And I wasn't sure if that was something that we desired down there. I don't know. But
Well, that's just something I'd like to bring forward to the board, because I don't know how far along it is. And I think it's important to take a look at maybe what's attracting, what kind of attraction is going on there right now, and then keeping it in C2, because the lots in the back are really big, as you know. So that was the consideration as well. But I think it would be important to take a look at that. From what I understood, it was actually something desirable, but right now I can't recall. So I'll just bring it forward over the next day or two.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, Sandra, if you have a big lot like what you're talking about, I think I know where you're talking about. It's like a really deep lot, so there's a lot of space behind the house that's there now.
Yeah, it's I think it's the image down on the bottom, one of those houses.
Okay. So if they did build something that was more units but kept it in character with what we see here, then I would think that would fit into what we're talking about. This overlay.
Yes, that's what that is. Absolutely. That's why I think if we, because I believe that project's moving forward, but I can't recall because there were so many different things that we were talking about as a follow-up to the first meeting. I'll present it or have Sean, just send the information, because it's in one of his reports as well. But now that you can put it in context to this, this definitely was one of the recommendations that came out of the committee's conversation.
Okay, yeah, because it
Ah.
does seem like a good idea to be able to
on.
have some denser housing
I
down
might.
there as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just want to clarify,
Uh,
we've had a few interests in larger projects. For example, the bank and Andrews Lane, and this was another one in a series. So I didn't mean to say we didn't want it. I'm just saying that that was something that the group discussed, whether it's a good thing or bad thing.
Yeah, sure, got it.
So,
And
so let me just, because I know there are people also watching too that that are on the committee. So for example, if, because this is what they can do, is knock down one of those buildings. Is that not correct, Simon?
correct.
And then build something else. So that's where we have to understand what this overlay zone does, because if all of a sudden you build something and it's out of character, then we're defeating what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and
Right.
so one thing I wanted to add here is that we've not zeroed in on what the massing and bulk details of this overlay might be. So
Okay.
we don't have we don't know exactly what the details are yet. We wanted to talk about this with the trustees first and get a feel for where you all are. But just to give an example, right now, the C2 district has a 0 front setback requirement, right?
Mhm.
So what somebody could do here right now,
Mhm.
you see where this house is here. I didn't know that this was one of the potential development sites. I just took a picture that I had, right? The way that this house here is set back from the sidewalk is part of the character down there. And it's
Yeah.
part of, as a pedestrian, what I think feels nice about it right now, right? That you're down in maybe a more active area down by the waterfront, you're making your way up to Beekman, and there's this, this area that's, it's got great tree cover, and the buildings give you a little bit more air from the street. It's what makes it a nice, in some ways, a pedestrian environment. But what somebody could do is take one of these buildings down and build it right up along the sidewalk, like you have on Upper
Right.
Beekman. It makes a lot of
Right.
sense on Upper Beekman. The question is whether that's what makes sense on this part of Beekman right now, right? It might be that, and you all might disagree, right? Feel free to do so. But where we landed in the comprehensive plan was try to keep the general character of this area for now as that sort of transition zone between the waterfront and Upper Beekman.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so let me jump ahead here, and we can certainly circle back to any of these with any additional questions. The list of proposed changes to permitted uses are all here on this one slide. The first one, what the plan recommends is essentially making the uses that are permitted in the C2 more expansive, more flexible, so that your code is not a barrier to someone who wants to open up a new kind of business. We talked about this with Sean McCarthy last week, and the sense we have right now is that the uses allowed in the C2 might not be the problem. It may already be general enough and broad enough. And one of the things that we're thinking about here is how is the retail market changing? What are the types of retail businesses that are going to work in a world where more shopping is done online? And in some cases, it might be a retail use that's also doing something else that might look like almost light manufacturing, right? If someone is putting something together on site, but also selling it on site. And it's really a retail store, but it's got a little bit of something else there, right? And our sense from talking to Sean is that he would approve that right now. So it might not be necessary to make a change here. So that's our sense on number one. Number two is one where we do think that there's a clear, at least among the committee that we've met with, a clear desire to make a change. The code right now prohibits a restaurant or any kind of food service establishment, a tavern or bar, from being located within 200 feet of any other such establishment. I believe this is a remnant of the heyday of the GM site when I gather Beekman was maybe a rowdier place than it is now. But this is something that could be a barrier. It could be something that is constraining local economic development that you might want to see. You know, my view personally is that there's nothing wrong with having two restaurants next door to each other. In fact, they might benefit each other in some cases. The third one here, allowing offices on upper floors. This one's not going to change the world, but it does allow some more flexibility. Right now in the C2 in a mixed use building, someone couldn't have office above some other use. If you had retail on the ground floor, for example, the market's not really for office. The market's for residential. If someone's going to put in a new building or renovate an existing building, but there's no reason not to allow it. If someone came in with a co-working space or some other kind of commercial space on the upper floors, you know, our view is that in what the plan recommends is that should be okay. And the final item is eliminating auto-oriented uses in the C2. The reality is that the only auto-oriented use that's allowed in the C2 right now are car washes. There are some other, you know, auto repair and you know, businesses like that exist. There is, as far as I understand, pre-existing non-conformities, pre-existing non-conforming uses. And the you know, zoning is not itself going to eliminate a use that exists. But we could remove car washes as a permitted use in the C2. Again, it's not going to change necessarily an existing operating use like that, but it would prevent a future such use from locating there in the C2. The next thing we looked at is parking, revising the village's parking requirements. The first bullet point down here is actually increasing a parking requirement for medical office, which tends to have a greater demand than other professional offices. But the others are the other items. The three bottom items are providing a little bit more flexibility, exempting small businesses from being required to provide loading space. You have a provision for off-site parking in the code, but it could be a little bit more flexible. It could allow the off-site parking to come from a little bit further away to make that more of an option for some sites. And the final one, exempting ground floor retail or commercial in existing buildings from parking requirements. We're really thinking about in the C2 zone for one of those existing buildings that doesn't have any parking on site and can't provide any parking on site. You know, essentially, if someone's going to come in for a new, you know, they're renovating the building, they can't provide any parking. Right now, you're forcing someone to go get a variance. We all know they're not going to be able to provide the parking. So why force someone to go to another meeting at the ZBA when there's no solution, right? They can't provide the parking now. They're not going to be able to provide the parking in the future. Just remove that barrier and you know, and let someone renovate a building if they're looking to do that. Okay, just two more here. This one, development incentives, I think is the one that is probably the trickiest to solve. This was a recommendation in the plan to look at certain areas in the C2 and the R5, maybe not across the board. We might need to narrow in on what the specific corridors are, or different parts of it are, and find a way to encourage infill development of some of the more challenging sites, renovation of existing buildings that are valuable, they're part of the fabric, but have barriers to being renovated, and potentially even assembling smaller lots to put together maybe a little bit of a larger development that can actually park itself. I think that's one of the issues with a lot of the small lots in the inner village, is that you've got an existing building there. There's you know, on-street parking shortages, and it's difficult to do any kind of redevelopment because of the size of the lots. So you know, I think this is one where we may have more questions than answers in terms of how this is done, because we want to make sure that we're not putting any ideas out there that that you all wouldn't support, that members of the community wouldn't, pardon me, wouldn't be supportive of. But the idea of providing development incentives is commonly done. It can be a good tool for the village and also for a developer to say, essentially, if you, the developer, provide XYZ community benefits that the village wants, you can then get some kind of development bonus, additional height, additional density. Maybe there's some other incentive that could be provided that could balance that equation out. So again, this is another area where I don't know what the appetite is, right? You know, I just to give a counterexample, we've worked in the city of New Rochelle on their downtown. New Rochelle is not what we have in mind here, right? In terms of what that bonus is. What you allow now in the C2 and the R5 is a maximum height of 45 feet. So the question really is, how much more would there be an appetite for if the village was getting something else that you value, whether that's more affordable housing, whether it's asking for a developer to provide some public open space, maybe it's public parking, maybe it's contribution to a community benefits fund or a neighborhood stabilization fund that the village could use for to provide other resources in the downtown. So, you know, again, this is one where we think we need some direction to make sure that we're not putting ideas out there that that are not going to be supported. Okay, last one here are some ideas to streamline the approvals process. This is one where, you know, in talking to Sean, you know, I'm not sure if this is as critical as we thought it was when we were working on the comprehensive plan, but one thing that I think is worth bringing forward, continuing to look at, is whether the approvals process, maybe it works for an experienced developer who's done it a few times, but it's still putting up some barriers for, say, somebody who owns just one property or a couple of properties, or a smaller developer who's not as well capitalized, and maybe just, you know, that extra barrier of having to go to a few more board meetings, or you know, needing that extra variance is what's sending someone to another community, or resulting in a building that could be renovated, not being renovated, whatever the case may be. And so we have a couple of ideas down here that could be considered. The first one, maybe you don't require site plan approval if it's just a change in use and there's not a change in the parking demand, right? That might be an easier process for someone. For properties that are existing non-conforming, is there a way to reduce the number of variances that someone has to seek? Is there a way to expedite the permitting process? I'm not sure that there is. That's something that we've started to talk about with Sean to get his ideas as well. So that's.
I'd like to add, sorry, Simon, I'd just like to add back on that. I think it's important to streamline these approval processes. I think it's something we should pursue as opposed to not pursuing it. I think it's important to not make it easier, but like you said, for people that are not experienced developing as a larger group, it might be a better incentive for them to develop here if the process wasn't as tedious and difficult as it currently is.
And if I can also chime in here too, what we're learning, and this is kind of really still teasing it out, is that because the zoning isn't really in aligned with a lot of the needs that are out there, that's where there's the conflict as well. So not to say that the process is perfect, but the process bumps into the fact that we need to update some of these zoning. And when that happens, this should get a little bit smoother, which then can really enhance the process even more. So I think there's two parts to it. It's examining that. I just don't think the process has been able to, what the requirements aren't really keeping up with the process. So the two are kind of managing together right now. And by changing that, that's gonna help kind of unearth some of the other things that has to happen too. And that's exactly what's been coming forward, is that people get very disappointed that they have to do something that's specific to a code, which we don't have any say in. We can't, as a village, it's the requirement, but they take it out on the process.
Right.
So if we can eliminate that barrier, then we can really understand what's going on with the process.
It's a great point. Yeah, Sandra, I think what you said at the end there, we've talked about this before, but I think that's a great distinction, right? If a use is not allowed, that's really a zoning issue, but people are sort of applying that and saying, no, the process doesn't work.
Right.
So that's, it's an important, and to Denise's point, I think that's what we need to sort of get down to, is what's the detail.
Absolutely.
Expediting the process is a laudable goal, and I think we need to, on our end, continue those conversations. And if you all have specifics that you know about too, we need to take this sort of concept that sounds great and figure out, all right, what words in the code need to change in order for that to happen. And so that's one of our next steps here. And so just to wrap up, and then I'll turn it back over to all of you for any other questions. This is circling back to that timeline discussion, but we're going to meet again with our steering committee on the 24th. We'll come back to see all of you with more detail when we see you in April. Again, we'll work with Anthony to figure out what date is best. And really the next step for us is going to be to start developing potential zoning text, so that you can look at that and tell us what you think is working and where we need to make some revisions. So with that, this is my last slide. I'm gonna stop sharing so that we can see each other's faces. But if you all have any questions on specific slides, let me know, and I can pull the presentation up again if you all want to look at any of those again. So thank you
Just
all.
a quick question. Earlier in the presentation, you talked about a district that has an issue with industrial sites in residential neighborhoods. And I think that's been an impediment for those particular areas. But I realize that they're existing businesses and they're grandfathered in, et cetera. But you originally were going down the path of saying maybe we shouldn't have industrial sites in that particular area, but then you seem to backtrack, or the committee did. So what exactly are you recommending for that particular district?
Glenn, let me pull that slide up again, because that's an important distinction between, and this is on Clinton Street. The distinction is between a commercial use, like a small shop or a corner store, or maybe even retail, right? Which exists. Let me find my pointer here so I can show you where I'm looking. Which exists sort of on, especially on this block of Clinton, right, just south of DePeister. There's a couple of uses like that. That in re-examining it with the committee, those look just fine to me. You all feel free to disagree, right? They look just fine to me for this part of the village. I think the issue that we were hearing about in developing the comprehensive plan is probably more of the industrial uses that are down here closer to Cortland. And those are already not allowed by in the C2 zone, right? So what we realized in meeting with the zoning committee is that the C2 zoning is not the problem, right? If you all agree with the premise, right, that the retail type of uses up here are okay, and it's really the industrial uses closer to Cortland that we want to see phased out over time. If that is the problem, it's not the C2 zone that's causing that. It's the fact that these uses have, preceded the existing zoning most likely, and have just, stuck around over time. Now, what's the solution to that? It might not be a zoning solution, right? Because, clearly by not allowing that industrial uses, that's not caused some of those, the auto body shops and other uses like that to go away.
one of the potential solutions might relate to that discussion of development incentives. It might be that, the economics of it have to change for those existing property owners to convince them to clear out and sell and move somewhere else. Or for someone who's interested in moving in, who may have to, some of those sites might have some contamination. It's going to cost some money in order to clean them up and then develop something new. And so the numbers may indicate for a potential developer that I can't do this. I can't make this work at a maximum height of 45 feet. I need something more than that. That might be one of the reasons why some of these uses have stuck around over time. One of the things that we touched on a little bit with Anthony and Sandra in some of our discussions is there a role for for the IDA, some kind of tax benefit that you could provide. Again, that's not a zoning solution. That might be part of the solution, but it's not in the zoning code. It's gonna exist sort of in parallel. So there might be other other recommendations like that we come up with along the way that it's not going to be in your code, but it might be another way to start to phase out some of the uses here that at least what we heard in developing the comprehensive plan, a lot of folks want to see changed.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit harder for people to invest in that area and improve their properties because it doesn't really lend itself well for residential buildings right on top of the industrial sites. And the proof is that nothing's changed in some of those areas for a long, long time. And, all of this is great food for thought. There's a lot of great concepts in here, requires a fair amount of discussion and back and forth. But the other thing that we need to think about as it relates to further development in the downtown area is our tax structure and the challenges that we face with homestead and non-homestead. Because at the end of the day, more real estate deals are lost based on taxes and parking more than anything else. So when we think about the obstacles to success, those two things really have to be addressed.
Yeah, this is a good moment actually to point out or raise something that Susan and I realized could be a helpful part of the work that we're doing. It wasn't something that we had anticipated, but in our first discussion with the committee, folks started bringing up some other zoning ideas that hadn't been raised during the comprehensive plan, aren't strictly within the scope of work that we have right now, but might be worth you all considering, right? I don't know that we would want to go ahead and just do them because you would want more of a public process. These ideas all came out of the comprehensive planning process, so I think we feel confident that they've gotten some review. But we might have almost an appendix to the zoning revisions that we produce with the direction of the committee and you, that are future ideas to consider. And some of them might be ideas like what you're talking about right now, Glenn, just, other changes that the village ought to look at that can help to support the zoning work as well.
Other questions for Simon? Well then, thank you, sir. We look forward to the next update and the continuing work of the committee. And again, our thanks to you, Sandra, and to all of the members of the committee.
All right, thank you all. Great to see you all again.
Thank you, Simon.
Bye, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Back next month. Thanks again.
Okay, as is often the case, from the really interesting and far-reaching to the mundane. Mr. Giacchio, it's time for us to talk about the pothole killer again. Not to downplay it. I mean, it's a pretty cool machine that works really well, but it looks like it's our opportunity to join with our sister river towns to engage the services of this really useful piece of equipment. Correct?
I want to say we've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years now. We've been working with 6 other villages as part of our village officials committee. It's one of the initiatives that we came up with that has really helped each community financially, and also to fill potholes that lasts a lot longer than our old way of doing things. So it's been a success story. We're looking to do it again starting in mid-March. And contrary to what you said, I think more people are concerned about potholes than zoning right now.
Yeah.
There's so many of them.
The streets are really in bad shape. So it'll be a good thing. Depending on the weather, we usually start mid-March towards the end of March, and we get 2 or 3 days out of it, and it's been very successful. So recommending that we pursue this.
I think, well, I'm definitely going to put it on for next week, and I'm anticipating unanimous approval because, as you said, the machine does work really, really well. And as we hopefully exit what should be seen as kind of a more normal winter, and since the last couple didn't seem to have as much snow as we've gotten so far, but with all that precipitation, our streets are in worse shape. So this is very timely. So we'll put it on for next week. And any questions or comments from anybody?
You know, it's very helpful to solve a problem on a timely basis, but they don't typically last as long as you would like. So certain streets that have had a series of potholes, and the pothole killer comes and takes care of the problem, the next year or two, there are similar problems. So it doesn't really solve the long-term issue, which is certain streets need to be paved. And they're much less likely to have potholes. That's been my experience so far. I can just look out front and see the same potholes popping up on Hunter Avenue, for example, that have been there for the last few years.
I have a comment, and this is basically to the public. If they, have major potholes in their streets and their areas, please let Anthony know so that we could focus that pothole killer on those spots, because there's some places where they're really bad spots that need to be taken care of. They're kind of dangerous.
Okay. Good thoughts, both. And anybody wants to reach out, 366-5105 for Mr. Giacchio. Okay. 366-5105. And we'll put that on for next week. Next item on our agenda, it's hopefully an easy one. This is a 5 Tuesday month. Our practice has been to take, when we have 5 Tuesdays in a month, to take one of them off. And we're in one of those months. So first question for folks to consider is, do we want to take one off and have our normal 4 meetings? I guess I shouldn't say taking one off, but do we want to have an extra meeting this month is the right way to say it. And if we do not want to have an extra meeting, which Tuesday in the month would that be? So we're looking at, since this is the 2nd and a Tuesday, we've got the 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th. Your comments, folks?
I don't have a preference.
How about, are we going to have an extra meeting or not? We are
I'm fine not having an extra meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. I am going to take the silence of the others to mean you're not in
Agreed,
favor.
agreed.
You're not in favor of an extra meeting. So since we're not going to have an extra meeting, which one of these Tuesdays would you like to take off? I would not suggest next week.
How about the 16th? It's a work session.
I was gonna say that the end of the month, the 30th, if that works for people.
I would suggest not taking that day off. There's a reason we have a deadline. The board
On-
may need to,
On the 30th?
yeah, the board may need to pass something on the 30th.
Okay. That's
So
my.
then
okay.
the 23rd, because it'll be after
That's a board meeting.
election. Oh.
The police reform needs to be adopted by April 1st, then the 30th
I know.
will give the committee enough time to get it done.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, whatever day works.
That is, it doesn't, yeah, just to elaborate on that very slightly, the police reform submission to the state needs to be approved and sent to the state, and the police reform and reinvention collaborative will continue after the 1st. So the 16th, 23rd.
Well, didn't Denise
How
say
about
that
the 16th? And then that gives us the 2 at the end. Okay.
Yeah, because the
Yeah.
23rd is a board meeting,
board
so
meeting? Yeah.
rather a work session.
All right. So we will take off on the 16th and we'll have our 4 regular meetings on the 9th, the 23rd, and the 30th to complete the 4 for the month. Correct?
Sounds good.
All right. So next week, if we need to adopt that more formally, we'll do that in the meeting. But Mr. Giacchio, could you just make sure that the notification goes out now that there will not be a trustee meeting on the 16th?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. There's one other item that I just wanted to add to the agenda, at least to begin the discussion. And that is, we have long been considering and evaluating ways of addressing the sinkholes, I should say plural, at Ichabod's. And we passed a capital budget that includes money to address that. Quite a large sum of money, frankly, to address that. And Mr. Giacchio has a proposal that's come in that I think would be a good discussion point at the very least for us. And I would at least like to introduce that now as we continue discussing that. Mr. Giacchio? And it was just received very recently and I think distributed to the board today. So I'm not anticipating any kind of substantive or really thorough discussion of the board tonight, but I'd like to get it started. Can you walk us through the high points, please?
So McLaren Engineering is the engineering firm that did the 2 reports on the bulkhead that we've done over the years. They've sent scuba divers in, they've done photographs. They have a good feel for what the problems are with the bulkhead. One of the issues with timing is that, and as you pointed out, the board has already authorized the design through the capital budget. But one of the things about the timing is if we can get this design done and construction drawings by the end of, say, June, we'll be able to strengthen our grant application to the state when the CFAs come out in July, showing that we've already committed funds to get the work started. It'll go a long way in getting a grant to do the actual construction. And because of our local development, our waterfront LWRP, it helps us because it brings people to the water and it helps restore our river walk and potentially our boat launch. So It's all the kind of the stars are aligning here if we can get this done in time.
I think we should move forward. It's something that we've wanted to address for quite some time. It's definitely a need. We hadn't had the resources in the past, but I think putting some money into the capital budget to get us started was a really good thing. And so it's all teed up. You know, getting started is important. We'll have to make a lot of important decisions because there'll be more than one way to do this, but progress is important.
Mhm. Other comments?
I agree. We need to start moving with it. I mean, it's been a dangerous area for quite a while. It's been an eyesore, and we have so many people down on the waterfront now. I think it's something that really has to be taken care of. I'd be okay with going ahead with this.
Yeah, me too.
And I think, why don't we do this? We can revisit this next week. We've got some time to thoroughly review the information that's been given to us, and we could, since next week is a regular board meeting, we could act on it then if we feel that we're ready to do that. I second your comments, three of you, that yeah, we've already acted in a way that matters a lot, and that is we've set aside some money to make sure that we can go forward with this and get it underway. And I think Mr. Giaccio's comments about the grant approval process are right on target. That, you know, state, feds, whoever it is that might be willing to step up and help us on this, love to see that you've already started and that you've committed your own funds to making it happen, that you're not relying on somebody else, and we have done that. So I think getting the work underway would be really positive. It's also, timing wise, we've got the Riverwalk next door, likely to go into construction this year. So it would be terrific to see you know, both of these take off at the same time, and have that whole portion of the riverfront back again. Okay, so let's look at this next week and be prepared to hopefully take action on that, and we'll move forward. Thank you, Mr. Giaccio, for pulling this in for us. There being no other business, we've completed our agenda. We will adjourn and we'll rejoin, and we'll see everybody again next week. Just be reminded that the Board of Assessment Review at the latest will be meeting again next Tuesday. So please, any members of the board who have any questions on the grievances, please reach out to Ms. McCarthy, and look forward to going forward. So thank you all, and good night, and be well.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh,
Good night, everybody.
wait a minute, hold it. Time out. I'll repeat this again next week. And there's no really polite way to say this, but it's many people have dogs, including me, and responsible folks, people care about their neighbors, pick up after their dogs. And unfortunately, we have people in the village who don't do that. And even worse, we have people that walk their dogs in our public parks, and including in our playgrounds, and don't pick up after their dogs. And that is just simply disgusting and foul and wrong. You have a place where little kids play, and you let your dog run around in there, and you don't pick up after your dog. And it's like, there's no excuse for that, none at all. And we're not into public shaming, but this is one place where we should be. You have a dog, you're supposed to take care of it, and that is one of the things you have to do to take care of your pet. So, like, don't do this to the rest of us, and especially not to our children. It's just simply wrong. So I'm going to lead with that next week. Some things just shouldn't stand.
I think what happened with this is with the snow, it became very difficult for people to reach where their pet. Oh, I'm not making excuses. Let me finish. And so they took the easy way out of just walking away or throwing some snow over it. And it's a health hazard. It's really kind of gross, and nobody wants to have that in their neighborhood. And we actually sent out a note in Sleepy Hollow Manor asking people not to do that and to please pick up after their dog. And so we appreciate that. I think that's the key thing is it's easy to walk away if your dog has pooped on a mound of snow and it's 10 feet away and you got to get your ankles a little wet. Please do that for your neighbors. Thank you.
You're so right. Please do it. And on that wonderful note, thank you all again, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Be safe,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.